PRISM for hosting this event. Special thanks also to Jacek and Liberty International. I've had the pleasure of speaking at LI events in Poland, as well as a few other places, and it's always a great honor. Well, I do have a few notes. You know, when you get to be my age, you don't trust the memory quite as much as you used to, but I'm going to keep it right there and refer to it only as I need to. My task this afternoon is to tell you about a new project that is the result of a collaboration between Liberty International and libertarianism.org. It's an essay that will be ultimately a video as well. I understand that's in the works. That can be used in the classroom or really any place, but it's based upon the famous essay written by Leonard Read, no relation, in 1958, I, Pencil, but adapted to something that today people are probably more familiar with. We kind of thought that pencils might be on the road to obsolescence, at least among young people. So I think maybe part of the thinking process of coming up with a new essay titled I, Smartphone was to focus the same principles on something that people are more familiar with. I don't know that, I bet there's not a person in here who doesn't have a smartphone. I won't ask you for a show of hands to embarrass you, but you know how ubiquitous they are. But let me start by telling you that the principles that we illuminate in the new essay, I, Smartphone, subtitled Far Smarter Than You Ever Imagined, the principles are the same as those that Leonard Read incorporated into his famous essay in 1958. So I'll be kind of going back and forth between the two. There are principles in Leonard's essay that even staunch lovers of liberty may have missed, believe it or not. And so one of the points of my talk today is to reacquaint you with that essay and the principles we've borrowed from it for I, Smartphone. You probably recall, I would guess everybody here has read the original I, Pencil. It came out in December of 1958. Phi, at that time, was not yet a decade old, and we were pretty much alone in terms of full-time organizations devoted to advancing ideas of freedom and free markets, not just the economics of those things, but the morality of free markets as well. And so Leonard was looking around for anything that might grab an audience. And in fact, one of the things we've had to do over the years at Phi was to sort of, as the movement grew, sort of focus on particular audiences because there were so many other groups, many times that came into existence inspired by something that Phi did. But we had to decide at some point, let's focus on a different demographic or a particular demographic. The whole world is not our oyster anymore, thanks to the fact that the movement has grown so dramatically. So we now focus on high school and college age students. But back in 1958, Leonard was willing to speak to anybody who would listen. And he was a great storyteller. He understood that if you want to get people fired up about liberty, you couldn't just lecture to them or down to them as if they were a university classroom. You often had to spice up what you were saying with real stories of real people or real something. And of course, pencils are very real. So he decided to focus on the pencil and tell the story of its, as it says in the essay, its genealogy, as if the pencil was doing the talking. So the pencil explains in the original essay, this is how I come into being. I have a genealogy. It didn't just start with me. There's a lot of stuff that went into the process that resulted in me. And he walks you through the process of constructing a pencil, and the end result of the essay is the very obvious conclusion that pencils are far more complicated than you ever imagined. You may have thought of a pencil as something that if you had to, you could make it yourself. But Leonard points out in I, Pencil, you couldn't make it entirely by yourself if you lived 1,000 years. If you had to rely on every bit of the process, if you had to rely only on what you could come to know, Nobody else's expertise or talents or no literature of any kind. You just had to start completely from scratch and make a pencil. You wouldn't know how to do it. Leonard was making a lot of points in this essay. One of them is he tried to explain that pencils come into being not by some order of a central planning office. There's no master commander who issues orders. The peasants need pencils. You make the wood. You make the graphite, or you make the pencil. Masterminds are not involved in the construction of a pencil. And yet, there are people from all over the world who apply their unique skills and talents at some stage of the process of making pencils that produces the end product. And most of the, with few exceptions, these are people who don't even know each other. I mean, that's a remarkable thing when you think about it. Another of Leonard's points is that we're not awestruck often enough by what we see around us. We should be struck with awe when we think of how something as seemingly simple as a pencil is the result of literally thousands of people who don't know each other, none of whom are doing what they're doing because they know you or like you, and yet they collaborate and are driven towards an end product entirely by what, say, Adam Smith would call an invisible hand. It really is a remarkable thing. We take that for granted, don't we? And yet, if I had a class of, I think I'd start even as early as the 4th or 5th grade, I think I would want students to come away from one or more lectures with the idea that the world around them is absolutely miraculous. And things that we just sort of ho-hum take for granted are the result of many miracles along the way. Well, how are we guided to make pencils? If there's no mastermind that orders them, no mastermind that tells us we have to make smartphones either, how do they come into being? How are we guided? Where's that information come from, or how is it conveyed? And of course, Leonard pointed out that in marketplaces we have something called the price system that we also take for granted. Prices convey messages. They send signals. They tell us, whether we're fully conscious of it or not, what is needed where it's in short supply, where it's in overabundant supply, whether there's a better way to put this thing together because there are substitute products that might be more, or inputs that might be more affordable. Prices convey an immense amount of information. In the old Soviet Union, where they felt at the top that the market, if left alone, was just chaos, they thought, well, the government has to dictate prices. It has to tell you what they are. And, they never got it right, or very, very, very seldom. You could go into old Soviet stores and find empty shelves, and then down the other aisle, shelves stocked with stuff that nobody wanted, for which there was little market outside of the Soviet bloc, if at all. They thought that they had enough wisdom to declare and fix prices from on high. But one of the lessons of Leonard Read's iPencil and of iSmartphone is that that's a pretense to knowledge, as Hayek would later say. We quote Hayek in the essay because he is really the go-to guy when it comes to knowledge in society and how dispersed it is and how we access it through marketplace mechanisms, not through the wisdom of central planners. But one of his best quotes ever is the following. He says, "It is the curious task of economics to teach men how little they know about what they imagine they can design." I mean, think of that. I can't think of a more concise way to express one of the most profound principles of economic and social life. It's the curious task of economics to convince men how little they know of what they imagine they can design. The marketplace does it every day without anybody from the top with the power of government and armies and guns and so forth telling us how to do that. We have, as Leonard pointed out, and as we point out in the smartphone essay, we have something also very powerful in markets, namely the profit motive. That is more powerful than central commands in terms of getting people to apply their ingenuity, their talents, to the production of things that other people want. And sometimes I hear people say, well, you seem to suggest that everything that happens in a marketplace is because of the profit motive. But what about the charitable impulse? Don't we see some people do things for charitable, altruistic reasons? Shouldn't we give credit to that? And, you know, as the former head of a 501c3, I've never been against charity. But I have to point out that very little of what happens in the world is due to the charitable impulse when it comes to the material goods, for sure, and services that feed us and clothe us and house us and determine our standard of living. You know, I would dare say, I don't think you could prove that even a double-digit percentage of that awesome output stems from the charitable impulse. I always say, look, if you have an opportunity, you see someone in need and you can solve or help solve their problem on the spot and you choose to do it with your own resources, more power to you. I think we all do that. But don't confuse that with the profit motive that is responsible probably for everything that you see before you in this room. Nobody made that camera because they know you or like you or wanted to flog themselves on your behalf. Nobody made the sofa, the chairs, nothing here likely was made purely because of the charitable impulse. It was because people wanted to improve their well-being, and in markets you do that by serving others, finding what they want, provide it, and hopefully at a cost that's more affordable than another provider might make possible. Well, you know, there has been for decades, actually centuries, this notion that a handful of elite, of powerful people with political power would have enough knowledge to tell the rest of us how to live our lives. Life doesn't work that way, and that certainly isn't how the smartphone comes into existence. Nobody ever ordered the smartphone to exist. Let me turn to the next page here. In applying the principles that Leonard illuminated in iPencil to the smartphone, I found, as I suspected right from the start, that smartphones are infinitely more complex than pencils. Even though you could not make a pencil entirely on your own, you and a gang of 1,000 friends couldn't make a smartphone either entirely on your own. The level of complexity is so far above that of a pencil. How many metals, elements, substances would you guess, compounds, are in the typical iPhone? Any guesses? Close. More than 60. And they come from 6 of the 7 continents. They include lithium, which is used in the making of lithium batteries. It includes copper, gold, some minerals I couldn't even pronounce. I want to share some of those if I have those here. Neodymium, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so well, I'm talking to a technical crowd here. Yeah, there are a lot of those I had never even heard before as I was learning something of the process of making a smartphone. It really is an incredible thing with supply chains that span the world and with a flexibility that you would never find in, let's say, a centrally planned or government-run operation. You have the movement of resources as they are found and perhaps become more affordable around countries and continents. You have, there is a movement right now to assemble fewer smartphones in China and assemble them instead in places like Vietnam and India, Malaysia, places like that. And it's the price system that's sending those signals. I remember years ago, in fact, this is a connection to Leonard Read, his last years before he died in 1983, I knew him in the last 7 of those years. He would often get a speaking request that he could no longer do if it was very far away. He asked me once to fill in for him in South Dakota. It was a local event sponsored by the South Dakota Bankers Association, and the audience were high school juniors and seniors. And I don't recall what my general topic was, but I recall vividly saying something critical of government subsidies in agriculture. And these were kids who were probably overwhelmingly from farm families. And that's what they zeroed in on during the Q&A. And one of the students asked me, this is almost verbatim, Mr. Reed, you indicated you oppose federal subsidies for agriculture, but if the government didn't get involved in things like that, how would we know that the stuff we want to eat would get produced? We might all starve. This is medieval thinking, isn't it? The thought that, unless the king takes charge and tells us what to do, how will we know? But then, of course, the first question we should be asking is, how in the hell would he know what we really need? What kind of fount of wisdom could the king possibly be? So I had to figure out a way, how am I going to express to the student in a fashion consistent with our time limitations here, that the market answers these questions far more efficiently than any government can. So I said, well, let's suppose that you're right for a moment, and the government stopped its involvement in agriculture. Let's say it's subsidizing wheat. You grow a lot of wheat out here. So I said, what do you think would happen if the government withdrew from wheat production and didn't subsidize farmers to grow wheat? What would happen to the supply of wheat? And somebody answered that rather quickly. Oh, it would decline, at least at first, because farmers would leave. That's the problem. Unless they're paid by the government or stimulated by the government, how would they know to produce wheat? And then they even understood this concept. I said, if the supply of wheat goes down, what do you suppose will happen to the price of wheat? And I think the students all understood, well, it would go up, which was when I used it as an opportunity to say, I personally know nothing about growing wheat or baking it into bread. I teach. But if the price of wheat were to skyrocket because farmers are producing less of it, at some point, even I would take notice. And I would say, the heck with this teaching stuff. I'm going to figure out how to grow wheat, because the price system is screaming, we want more wheat. So at some price, I would become a wheat farmer. And it wouldn't take the dictates of a central planner to order me to do that. It would be the result of the incentives baked into the market system, my desire to do better for myself, and the signals that prices send as to where this stuff is most needed and where it is less needed. If I could pick, say, the half dozen greatest, most awesome features of life in a free society, I would have to say, give the Nobel to the price system, because it solves endless problems so much more quickly and efficiently and according to consumer wishes than any government planning body ever could. It's just as true for the smartphone, all of these principles, processes from the marketplace as it was with the pencil. I point out in the essay that I had a friend in high school named Angus. That was his nickname. He was big, and he came from also a farm family there in western Pennsylvania. And he had a very vivid imagination. He was really into the space program. I was in high school in the late 60s, so we were all looking forward to landing a man on the moon in 1969, and that absorbed a lot of people's attention. So Angus kept talking over lunch about how he'd love to build a spaceship and take it to other planets. And so one day I said, well, why don't you design it, do it, go ahead and do it. And he kind of took me seriously, and he came back in some days later. He had a big sheet of this brown wrapping paper on which he designed, at least he thought, he had designed a spaceship that could take him to Mars. He thought he had all the buttons indicated that you would possibly need. He had a button for, on, off, dodge asteroids, or, he just thought, he even had an all-purpose, got a problem, push that button. He thought he had the central plan that you'd have to make a spaceship that could take you to Mars. And the thing I most remember about this interaction with him was not so much his plan, because I'm sure it never got to first base, but my frustration at convincing him that he really had no plan at all. That the first thing he should do is admit how little he really knows. This is just a piece of paper with a bunch of buttons on it, and you couldn't begin to operate from that and turn that into a spaceship. But you know, the planning mentality, coupled with a fervent desire to do good to others, often takes charge, and rarely does it produce anything but lousy outcomes. Well, with the smartphone, I think we have an opportunity to bring young people into our ideas through the use of an item that they already are very familiar with. They probably already know that it's a complicated thing, that they couldn't make one. But when you get into the details of where the minerals come from, more than 60 of them, 6 continents, 6 of the 7, the immense and complicated supply chains that are involved, the people and the skills that they bring to bear cover everything from engineering to somebody applies the paint and has to make the paint. Somebody else has to make the paint. There's just a million jobs, and I want to share with you a portion of the essay verbatim, just so you get a taste for it. And then, how much time do we have, Jacek? 5 minutes, okay. Let me just share with you so you get a flavor for the essay as it applies to the smartphone. We spent ever so little time talking about the raw materials involved. There's a lot more detail in the essay. But obviously you can't call your mother through a pile of metal. They have to be put together through lots of trial and error in just the right size, shape, juxtaposition, and connectivity to each other that will allow you to make that call, utilize that app, take that picture, and perform dozens of other tasks in your hand. Nobody knows exactly how many design architects have been involved since the first smartphone, but you can bet it's a big number. They're key players in transforming a dummy prototype into a working, consumer-friendly model, and they're still at it as features are improved and added with each new version. An unknown number of people are employed full-time to simply test those dummy prototypes before mass production ever begins. They drop the dummy phones from various heights, dump them into buckets of water to see what happens. They test the response of the buttons repeatedly. They might even slam a few of them with hammers, as Hillary Clinton did. Designing and testing are that might be the part of the process I would most enjoy. Designing and testing are just 2 aspects of the very complicated process of assembly and manufacturing. Did you know that the world's first computer, called ENIAC, built not all that long ago, 1946, it couldn't perform a fraction of what today's smartphone can do, yet it occupied nearly 2,000 square feet and weighed almost 30 tons. Think of the miniaturization that has happened that has allowed us to do more in our hand than a 30-ton machine could do in 1946. It weighed a little over 27,000 pounds to be precise. Amazing, isn't it, how much harmony arises from what must seem from afar to be chaos with no puppet master pulling all the strings. We call this in economics spontaneous order. Adam Smith, 250 years ago next year, marveled at what we call today spontaneous order. He wrote, by pursuing his own interests, the individual frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. I have never known much good, he said, done by those who affected to trade for the public good. Imagine if Adam Smith could visit us today and your job was to acquaint him with what a smartphone does and how it does it. He would likely be flabbergasted within the first minute. It would be immensely helpful, of course, if you had one in your hand to show him, but you'd have an awful lot of explaining to do to a man from the 18th century. High-resolution camera? What on earth is that? He might well ask. Elaborate, and then you could move on to voice recognition software, iOS, versus Android operating systems, screen resolution, microprocessor speeds, integrated circuits, semiconductors, cloud storage, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth capabilities. Get past that scientific stuff, and you could also show him how to watch movies and play video games on the device while hoping he doesn't ask you how movies and video games get into something so small. While the great man would find much of what you're telling him to be incomprehensible, I know what his reaction would be if you said, and all this, Mr. Smith, happens without the king or parliament having anything to do with it. An advanced division of labor, diffuse knowledge, profit incentives, market prices, all of that does it all. I think at that point he would likely smile and reply, I know, I told you so in 1776. So with that as a tantalizer, I hope you will read the essay and see the video when it's ready. You can read it now, I think, at libertarianism.org. Is it also on the LI site? In a few days, okay. And then there's a video or a podcast coming out from libertarianism.org later this month. So it's just beginning its unveiling. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll find good uses to put it to in bringing new people to the ideas of freedom and free markets. Thank you so much.